Okay, this is a reaction video. This is from Alice Talks Football. Please click like, share, and subscribe for her as well as for me. I would appreciate it. So is she. This is my final Champions League predictions. Well, Champions League prediction. Today is Arsenal plays against PSG. Tomorrow, Barcelona hosts Inter, and then the next week they play the return legs, and then we determine who's going to be in the final. Now, my prediction is it's going to be Arsenal versus. That's going to be Inter has actually hit bad. Has actually hit bad run of form. They lost to Milan in the Coppa Italia. I think it was 3-0 last week, and they also lost it on the weekend. I'm going to pick Arsenal versus Barcelona. I'm going to bring a replay of the 2006 final, which Barcelona won. That's my prediction. Arsenal versus Barcelona. So it's here for all to see. But let's see what Alice has to say.
The Champions League semi-final kicks off tomorrow, and
Of course, she's more concerned about the Europa League since she's a Manchester United fan.
I'm going to do my final predictions ahead of the Champions League, telling you what I think the semi-final results will be, who will win, who will meet in the final, and how it will go. Now, as much as I dislike Arsenal, I have to say, from a neutral perspective, this Final Four for the semi-final, very good matchups, very good. Arsenal, PSG, Inter, Barcelona, 4 different leagues, 4 very good teams with different strengths, different weaknesses. I think it's an exciting semi-final, and interestingly, 3 of the final 4 finished in the top 4 in the group stage, and the one team that didn't finish top 4 in the group stage, PSG, knocked out Liverpool that finished first in the group stage. Interestingly, same in the Europa, 2nd, 3rd and 4th in the Europa in the semi-final, first isn't. So interesting there, but it just shows where actually you placed in the group stage could be an indication of how far you could go. Now, we're going to firstly talk about the quarterfinals and just a little bit of what we learned from the quarterfinals, and then we're going to talk about the semi-final matchups and who I think is going to meet.
Look, the quarterfinals, how you look at it is Inter got by Barcelona, got by Bayern Munich. Really fortunate to get by Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich, they beat Bayern at home, and then drew with them at the San Siro. But well deserved, but fortunate. PSG, another team that got by on Aston Villa, but was they quite fortunate to get by. They had to play at Villa Park and almost threw it away. Barcelona destroyed Dortmund, and again. Probably won it in the first one, even though they lost the second one. And who's the other one? I think I've got them all. So right now I would say Arsenal's the number 1 team, the favorite in my opinion.
In the final. But yeah, let's talk about the quarterfinals to begin with. So we obviously had Bayern Inter, Arsenal Madrid, Barcelona Dortmund, and PSG Villa. Now, first of all, we've got to talk about Arsenal versus Madrid. Arsenal absolutely smashed Real Madrid 3-0 at the Emirates. Absolutely smashed them. Declan Rice put in the performance of a lifetime. But
I said this before and I've said this again. If Sir Alex Ferguson, this was 10, 15 years ago, and Ferguson was managing Manchester United, okay, Declan Rice would become a Manchester United player. That is a foregone conclusion. But because Ferguson isn't there, he's now an Arsenal player. That is the big difference between Manchester United now and Manchester United back then. Fergie wants you, he gets you. Okay, and Fergie would have wanted Declan Rice, but he didn't get him. Arsenal did.
Bukayo Saka had a very good game. He started to find some space. Jurrien Timber, defensive masterclass. I think the defensive side of the right back position, when it comes to 1v1 defending, when it comes to duels, when it comes to defending the wide channels, Jurrien Timber can lock down anybody. Jurrien Timber's going to be up against Kvaratskhelia, who I think will cause him more issues than Vinicius Jr. I had an unpopular opinion. I said it back in January that I'd rather, if Man United could, and we could never, I'm a Man United fan, but I said I'd rather have Kvaratskhelia at Man United than Vinicius. I'd take them both at United, but if I had to pick, I would take.
Look, I wouldn't take Vinicius Jr. if you offered him for me. If you offered him to me for £100, I would not take your Vinicius Jr. at all. Okay, he is too much of a diva. Good player, solid player, but really, no, not in a million years would I take Vinicius Jr.
Kvaratskhelia. Not that any of them would ever come near Man United, but I think Kvaratskhelia is an incredible winger. And Yuri and Timber, that matchup's going to be so interesting because they've got Barcola, they've got Desiree Doué, who's unbelievable. They've got Dembele, but Dembele's finishing can let him down in those positions. You know, they've got some incredible talent. But Yuri and Timber set up for that. William Saliba, I know he's made a couple of mistakes lately, set up for that. Gabriel will be a huge miss, but they've got, Kivior that stepped up. Lewis Skelly versus Dembele would be a very interesting matchup, but Lewis Skelly's solid, physically good. Maybe Calafiori goes in there with Lewis Skelly going in the field, with Partey missing. But we know Arsenal absolutely smashed.
Yeah, I mean, defensively, Kivior has just come in and stepped in for Gabriel, and we haven't really missed Gabriel a whole lot. So that is the big thing. Now, the real question that I have about Arsenal is not the defense; it's the midfield. Mourinho has been up in the front, but what do you do with Partey being suspended? Do you put Mourinho back in the midfield with Rice and Odegaard, and put Trossard in the false nine?
Real Madrid 3-0 up at the Emirates. Unbelievable Declan Rice free kick. Could have won that game 5-0. It was an absolute demolition of Real Madrid. And the thing is, they went to the Bernabeu. Real Madrid gave all this talk when Arsenal went to the Bernabeu about, 90 minutes at the Bernabeu was a long time. Like, all this talk like they were going to have this amazing comeback to be pathetic and lose 2-1. And again, Arsenal just put in an absolute defensive masterclass. The first half, I think Real Madrid had about 0.02 XG. It was higher than that, but it was like they had nothing. Rodrigo, I don't think did anything over the two legs. He was dealt with by Marcelo Lewis Skelly excellently. Mbappe, don't even remember him. Vinicius got a goal sort of gifted to him in that game.
Yeah, I mean, the only goal that Real Madrid scored was actually gifted by Arsenal with Raya playing the ball to Saliba, and Saliba, lost it to Vinicius Jr., who scored the goal, but that was it. And that made the score 1-1. They were already down 4-0 on aggregate. That was like in the 72nd minute mark. They weren't going to score 3 or 4 goals in the last 18, 20 minutes of the game. It just wasn't going to happen.
But Arsenal put in a defensive masterclass to go to the Bernabeu, even if Real Madrid aren't as good as they used to be, to go to the Bernabeu and deliver a defensive masterclass. That's an unbelievable achievement from Arsenal after smashing them 3-0 at home. I know Real Madrid aren't the same Real Madrid, but the way that they were smashed and battered, Arsenal in a weird way, out of all the teams in the quarterfinals, will look the favourites because they were the most comfortable. Inter beat Bayern, but it was tight. Barcelona battered Dortmund, but almost bottled it in the second leg. PSG almost bottled it to Villa in the second leg. If you're going across the basis of the two legs, Arsenal look the most dangerous. Now let's talk about the other semi-finals. So we had Bayern Inter. This is the one I saw the least amount of, but I will say with Inter, Jose Mourinho and Inzaghi. Everyone was all about how beautiful Barcelona's football is, or how beautiful
Jose Mourinho and Inzaghi, that's pretty good.
For PSG's football is, but this is knockout football. It's about tacticians. It's not always about the best team. In the 38 league game season, I think the best team wins, but in Champions League football, it's about the day, it's about the occasion, it's about the mentality, it's about the one-off tactics for games. Eric Ten Hag won 2 trophies at Man United in 2 years, but we're atrocious in the league. But when it came to the tactics, he did it. And Man United beat Man City in the FA Cup final last year. And Man United better than Man City? No, we're atrocious. But you've seen that with Jose Mourinho in cup finals. It's how you approach that final a lot of the time. And Inter, they're a more defensive team. They're going to give you a little bit of space, but in the...
Look, Arsenal played Inter in the group phase of the Champions League and lost 1-0. That was the only loss they had in the Champions League. And it was on a controversial penalty kick. That was probably not really a penalty, but it is what it is, and that's what happened. It was at the San Siro. Inter would be a very difficult team to break down if you're Arsenal, because they play like they do against them in the league, and that's very difficult for Arsenal to break down, especially without a true center forward. However, they played Barcelona who likes to attack, and PSG, who likes to attack. That gives Arsenal an opportunity to score goals, and that's why they were able to beat Real Madrid. That's why they were able to beat PSV. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Inter's the team that Arsenal does not want to play.
The box, they're going to give you no space. They're unbelievable box defending, and it might not be as attacking and as amazing as PSG and Barcelona, but I tell you what, an Inter would frustrate Arsenal. Arsenal would much rather play Barcelona and PSG than Inter. I will tell you this now, because Arsenal...
Yeah, I just said that. Jeez, I say it here, it comes out there.
When it comes to breaking down low blocks, they're frustrated. Arsenal, when it comes to defending transitions, Barcelona, PSG, very good defensively. And then they can find space in behind to score. You know, Inter are one of those where Inzaghi could just put in a defensive masterclass. He's got Thuram and Martinez up top. Martinez was really good in that leg. And they could deliver something. They could absolutely deliver something, Inter. You know, Bastoni, arguably the best centre-back in the world. I think Van Dijk is. You know, he's an incredible player. They've got some incredible players. And Inzaghi, tactician. So, I think Inter, they're going to play Barcelona. Then we go to PSG Aston Villa. PSG, in that first leg versus Aston Villa, absolutely dominated Aston Villa. Absolutely did.
Yeah, and that's why they're talking about Arsenal having a difficult time going to Paris, is because PSG plays so good at home, but they don't play very good on the road. Again, that's why this game today is so important at the Emirates.
A little bit like they did with Liverpool in the first leg. Liverpool at home, they lost 1-0, but they were so dominant. Villa at home, they dominated Villa. They were incredible. The football they are playing, the attacking talent they have. But I'll tell you something about PSG. They're weak defensively. Like Real Madrid, all the talent in attack, but they're weak defensively. And that suits Arsenal. That really does suit Arsenal. You know, Aston Villa, you know, they nearly knocked PSG out. Aston Villa beat PSG 3-2 at home. I think had Rashford not been taken off, they would have taken it to extra time. Aston Villa destroyed PSG for moments of that game. They got at PSG. They were deadly. And PSG are gettable.
You know, but PSG scored 2 goals early on, and that's really what determined that game. PSG was up 2-0, and then Aston Villa scored one before the half, and then scored 2 more in the or maybe 3 more in the second, whatever it was. But PSG scored 2 goals early on. If PSG didn't score 2 goals against Aston Villa, and Aston Villa scores their goals, then Aston Villa goes through.
But Liverpool at Anfield, if they had were more clinical and won that penalty shootout, they would have knocked PSG out. Liverpool were atrocious in the first leg, but in the second leg, Liverpool could have won that 2-0. They lost 1-0. You know, PSG have weaknesses. Donnarumma.
Look, the game against Liverpool and PSG, Liverpool dominated PSG. They just absolutely dominated them, but just could not find a goal.
Is good in penalty shootouts, but he's got a weakness. Marquinhos can be a weakness. And then they've got all the talent in attack, but they're defensively gettable. They do leave space in behind. If you can deal with the PSG wingers, which Yuri and Timber definitely can. Lewis Skelly, I think him maybe moving into midfield. You know, you've got Calafiore, who's got some vulnerabilities there. But that's going to be very good, for Arsenal. I think Arsenal actually set up to beat PSG. I think Arsenal are going to beat PSG. I think the first leg will be difficult. Because I think even though it's at the Emirates, I think Thomas Partey being missing is a huge loss. And it'll be interesting to see if Lewis Skelly goes into midfield or goes left back. It'll be interesting to see.
Look, I think if I'm Arteta, what I'm doing is I'm going to keep the defense exactly as it is. Lewis Skelly, Kivior, Julian Timber, and I forget his name. Oh, shoot. Saliba. That's what I have in the back. And I put Mourinho, Rice, and Odegaard in the midfield, and I use Trossard as a false 9.
But I do think, with you being at home, I expect Arsenal to win the first leg. PSG at home are a lot better. Second leg will be difficult. But I think Arsenal are going to beat PSG tomorrow. I think the way that PSG are gettable at the back, they're going to give Arsenal space. How Arsenal are very good and proven that at defending transitions. They've dealt with Vinicius, Mbappe, Bellingham. I think that Arsenal will beat PSG. And I think Arsenal, sadly, will be in...
Don't you mean greatly? Don't you mean excitedly? Don't you mean fantastically? Arsenal will go through?
The Champions League final. I do. I think Villa showed how gettable PSG were. Liverpool even showed that PSG are very gettable defensively. If Arsenal put in a defensive masterclass, which they are very capable of doing, that's where they excel. They've done it versus City, they've done it versus Real Madrid. They will beat PSG. Now, Barcelona-Inter. Barcelona-Inter is a lot harder to predict because you've got two different matchups here. You've got Inter. As I said with Inter, it's more like a Jose Mourinho kind of thing where Thomas Tuchel won the Champions League with Chelsea. Chelsea's squad wasn't that great, but the way they were set up, defensively solid, Inter have...
And that goes to what she said about knockout football versus league football. Chelsea, Thomas Tuchel did a fantastic job in getting that Chelsea team to win the game, to beat Manchester City and to win the Champions League. Fantastic win for Chelsea.
A really good squad. I'm not saying that the squad isn't great, but they're all set up quite defensively, and they will give Barcelona a lot of the ball, and they're going to box defend and try and hit Barcelona on the counter, get at them defensively. If Balde is out for Barcelona, that is a big blow as well, because he's been a very good left back this season. Also, Barcelona being young, maybe I think they've been unbelievable this season, but sometimes in those big games, in those big moments, that could be a big thing, because Barcelona, as good as they were in the first leg, when they went away to Dortmund, Barcelona away from home in the Champions League, they haven't got that mentality. Dortmund beat them 3-1, but I tell you what, Dortmund could have been 4-0 at half-time. The way that Dortmund outplayed Barcelona in that second leg was crazy.
Now, unfortunately, I didn't see that game. I was not. That was the one game wasn't able to see, the Champions League. But from what I understand, I think Barcelona's even goal was an own goal, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, Dortmund could have absolutely knocked Barcelona out of the Champions League.
Absolutely crazy. That while Barcelona went through 5-3, Dortmund could have taken that game to extra time. PSG's game could have been taken to extra time. Dortmund's game most definitely could have been taken to extra time. So Barcelona, I think Lamine Yamal, arguably is a top 5 player in the world already. You can argue top 3, maybe top 3. I think he's so good. It's ridiculous how good he is. If Pedri is fit, that makes a huge difference to Barcelona's season. The youngsters they've got, Flick as a manager. You've got Barcelona-Inter. I think Barcelona will have too much of the ball and be a little bit too much for Inter. I think Barcelona...
Again, Inter has hit a bad run of form recently, and in the league, in the Coppa Italia and the league, they may... And Barcelona's at home in the first game. So that could be a big advantage for Barcelona.
They're going to do it. They've beaten Real Madrid multiple times this season. They've been unbelievable this season. Flick, and Inzaghi, that is, for me, that's a final Barcelona. So is PSG Arsenal, to be honest. I think Inzaghi could definitely do it. He could do it with Inter. I think they're phenomenal, and I think if I'm Arsenal, I'd rather play Barcelona in the final than Inter. If it was an Arsenal-Inter final, Inter win it. Inter win it for me.
I'm not so sure about that, okay? I think Inter makes it difficult, but I think Arsenal can still win that game, okay? I don't think Inter necessarily beats Arsenal, but I think it's a closer game. I think it's a more difficult game for Arsenal. But I don't necessarily think I would make Arsenal the favorite, say Arsenal's definitely going to win it, but I think Arsenal has a chance to win against Inter. So they have a chance. Arsenal, I think, is the best team of all the three. So I think they can beat any of them. They can also lose to every one of those teams. But I'm not so sure I would say that if Inter plays Arsenal, that Inter beats Arsenal.
For me. But I think it's going to be an Arsenal-Barcelona final. And this is where it gets interesting. Lamine Yamal versus Lewis Skelly. As good as Lewis Skelly's been this season, Lamine Yamal was a different test. An absolute different test. Rafinha, he's been unbelievable this season. Lewandowski. Pedri, if Pedri stays fit, Pedri indeed.
Now, granted, it was a preseason friendly, but I saw Barcelona play Arsenal a couple years ago in Los Angeles, and Arsenal beat them 5-3. Preseason friendly doesn't mean anything. Lewandowski was playing. I think it was Barcelona's first game of the entire season, preseason and otherwise. But it was a goal fest.
The young, the technicality there. There's young players in that Barcelona side. a lot of it depends on fitness. The one thing Arsenal have is their season is over. Liverpool have already won the league, so maybe Arsenal can rest players where Barcelona, Real Madrid are going to push them to the end for La Liga. It's an interesting one. I am worried Arsenal's going to win it.
You shouldn't be. You should be happy for Arsenal. You should be pleased for Arsenal's going to win it. You should be thrilled to death that Arsenal is going to win the Champions League.
I am seriously worried that Arsenal is going to win the Champions League. I feel like, you know how Chelsea won it with Tuchel, even if they weren't at the best in the Premier League? I feel like this is what Arsenal are playing for. I think the other teams in title races, they're burnt out, or PSG aren't, but I think Arsenal battering PSG in the group stage showed the physicality. I think Arsenal are up for it, and sadly, I think as good as Barcelona are, as good as Pedri is, as good as Lamine Yamal is, I think Arsenal could put in an absolute defensive masterclass and get at Barcelona. I think they could. But if Pedri's on his game, if Yamal's on his game, you would expect Barcelona. I think that final...
I don't know about that. Okay, again, even if they're on their game, I'm not so sure about that.
Well, whatever it is, it's going to be tight. But I think Arsenal are going to win it. I think if Inter make the final, Inter win it. But I think Arsenal...
I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure Inter beats Arsenal. They may. I could be wrong. I could be eating my words. But I'm not sure Inter makes the final over Barcelona. But again, we'll find that out. But I'm not so sure Inter beats Arsenal.
I think Barcelona will give them gaps. I think Saka will cause issues. Particularly if Balde's out. Who's going to defend against Saka? And I think, the La Liga teams, Man United have knocked out not Bilbao, Real Sociedad. They've looked not the best in Europe. A lot of the La Liga teams, you've just battered Real Madrid, but the best team in La Liga is Barcelona, and this will be a huge test because I think Barcelona played the most beautiful football. I want Barcelona to win, but I sometimes think maybe Arsenal, with the physical levels of them, maybe it's going to be an Arsenal winner in there. Let me know your thoughts.
Look, I don't really know. I can predict just like she can predict. I'm not sure Inter beats Arsenal. I'm not sure about that. But again, we'll find that out. Inter's got to get by Barcelona, and Arsenal's got to get by PSG before we can even talk about Inter versus Arsenal or Arsenal versus Barcelona. Okay, they got to worry about PSG first, and that's going to be enough of a challenge on our plate to worry about before we can start thinking about the final. But hey, please click like, share, and subscribe for Alex Talks Football as well as for me. I appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks for watching.